David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
This has happened before, and it's happening again. And in fact, we've covered this before on presidential election days. Video has caught an electronic voting machine switching votes, and we now have at least 3 reports of this happening in at least 2 different Mississippi counties based on the latest information, and this could still change. This was the Republican gubernatorial primary runoff. We have one video of it for you posted to Facebook by Sally Kate Walker, which shows a man attempting to vote for Bill Waller and the machine selecting instead Tate Reeves multiple times as the person taps the screen. So a few things here. This particular video is from the Burgess voting precinct in Oxford, and the same machines that are in use there are in use in lots of the state of Mississippi. The Secretary of State's office has put out a statement saying they're aware of the issue and they dispatched a technician as soon as they were told about it. This was a TSX machine. It's owned by the county. It was tested by local officials. 2 machines in Calhoun County have reportedly shown similar vote switching behavior. So, okay, this is a Republican gubernatorial primary runoff. They're fixing it. What happens if this takes place on presidential election day in November of 2020, when turnout is higher, when the stakes are, yes, they are higher, even though, of course, we want every election to be secure, when one precinct or a group of precincts could conceivably turn a state and one state could conceivably decide the presidential election? What do you do? Now, as of right now, there's no reason to think that this is foul play. This is most likely the screen being miscalibrated. So when you tap on a part of the screen, it's interpreted as you tapping on a different part of the screen. It's simple enough, but it's potentially 110% chaotic on election day. If one wanted to manipulate an election, you only need to interfere with some portion of the machines and some portion of precincts in just 1 or 2 states, and you can hypothetically turn the results of a presidential election. And this is where the left and right are truly different. I talk so many times on the show about there's lots of areas where left and right are basically the same, perpetuating the status quo. There are other areas where Democrats and Republicans are very different when it comes to sexual harassment by people within their party. Democrats and Republicans are very different. When it comes to net neutrality, Democrats and Republicans are very differently. Republicans have made it clear for more than a decade now, they are simply not super concerned with election interference, election tampering, voter suppression, etc., as long as their candidate wins. And they understand that a lot of this stuff helps the Republican over the Democrat, helps the more conservative Republican over the more moderate Republican within Republican primaries. But in principle, they don't care as long as they benefit from it in some way, shape, or form. The left, on the other hand, we just want 100% secure elections. We want everyone who wants to vote and attempts to vote to have their vote counted. And the reality is, of course, that the left benefits from greater turnout and more votes being counted because the country has moved to the left. There's no, the right will say, well, you guys just want more people to vote because it helps you. That's right. I want the highest level of participation in the system that we have, with the understanding that the will of the people will be most accurately reflected when as many people as possible actually go out and vote. When the right hears about this stuff, they say, well, both sides do it, even when it's not totally clear that something is actually being done. And when you zoom out, it is far more red states that have the electronic voting machines with no paper trail, which if one wanted to tamper with an election through the voting machines that have no paper trail, it would be a really great place to start. So this is, again, just another one of the many anecdotes of this taking place. It's not presidential election day, but we all understand the risk here, or at least We should understand the risk here. What's the next step with these particular voting machines? I don't know. But these types of voting machines are in use in a lot of the United States. Okay, so I haven't been talking much about this right-wing journalist named Andy Ngo. It's spelled NGO. I've been told it's pronounced no. I'm going to pronounce it that way today, and I'm going to talk about him today a little bit. Now, I know for a fact that a significant portion of my audience has not even heard of this guy. They're not aware of the controversy involving Andy Ngo. But at this point, I think it does warrant a discussion, even if you haven't been following the story, because Andy Ngo is just the worst kind of right-wing grifter. That's what I've learned over the last couple of months. So I'm going to explain the entire thing to you. Andy Ngo is an early 30s, 32, 33-year-old right-wing journalist. His parents came to the United States from Vietnam. He's an Asian American. He was born and raised in the United States, in Portland, Oregon. And he was known prior to June of 2019 in some niche circles for writing for a publication named Quillette. And in June, he was propelled to significantly more notoriety and fame because he was assaulted at a protest by Antifa protesters in Portland, Oregon. There was a right-wing Proud Boy march in Portland, Oregon. There was an Antifa counter-protest, and Andy Ngo was there, and he was attacked. He was punched. He was milkshaked. I mean, really bad stuff. I unconditionally denounced it. I haven't talked more about the broader Andy Ngo stuff, but the attacks on him, I denounced. I'm against violence. It's horrible. We shouldn't be doing this to anyone, period, okay? And people were saying, oh, Andy Ngo was baiting Antifa to attack him merely by being there because people know what he's written in the past. Okay, that all may be true, but the violence is completely out of line. I'm against the violence, period. Horrible, full stop. No other qualifiers are necessary. Now, when that happened, when he was attacked, of course, predictably, he immediately got a media round of interviews as a result. And the media interviews mostly set him up to talk about how violent the left is and how bad Antifa is. He was on Dave Rubin's show. He was on Joe Rogan's show. I think he was on Fox News. He was all over the place. And fascinatingly, a lot of the coverage was identity politics coverage, saying, look at this small in stature, gay Asian guy who was attacked by left-wingers, even though he checks identity boxes that the left should be defending or in favor of or whatever. I mean, it's a total identity politics argument. We know that the right claims to be against identity politics, except when they're for it, because it benefits them in some way, shape, or form. But then things started to sort of not make sense about Andy Ngo. So first of all, he had claimed that the milkshakes that were thrown at him, which I'm against, period, the milkshakes that were thrown at him contained concrete, which of course would conceivably harden and do serious damage to a human body. But there appears to be no actual evidence that there was any concrete there. So that started to be sort of a weird thing. Then I asked myself, when I watched interviews with this guy, why does Andy Ngo sort of speak in a British accent now, when if you look at videos from just a few years ago, he had a standard American accent and he was raised in Portland, Oregon? It's no crime to adopt a random accent. We know, what was it? Madonna has done it, right? But the people that do that, it's an odd thing to do. And often for me, it signals that there may be sort of more to the person. It's rare that all they do that raises questions is adopt an accent that doesn't correspond to where they were raised. Okay. But then it gets really bad journalistically. Okay. Andy Ngo starts reporting that at another Portland, Oregon protest, Antifa attacked right-wingers with hammers. He tweeted, Antifa attacks people on a bus. They try to pull them out and hit them with a hammer. And from the video he posted, it sort of maybe seems plausible, but very quickly more videos surface. And you actually see that the Antifa people, we might call them the counter-protesters, were pounding on the windows of a bus containing right-wingers from a white nationalist group. And it's actually the right-wingers in the bus who introduce a hammer, literally the opposite of what this guy Andy Ngo reports. And the people on the bus, again, they were either right-wing American Guard, which is a right-wing white supremacist group, or maybe Proud Boys, or a combination of the two. So the story is literally the opposite of what Andy Ngo reports. And then what Andy Ngo follows up with is, oh, right, it was the right-wingers who introduced the hammers, but they were doing it in self-defense, which is now a completely different story. I mean, really a grifter tweeting, quote, the mob rushed the buses as they were trying to leave and began attacking the vehicles with concrete. Before attacking the people inside, the buses could not continue driving because protesters were standing in front. In that context, the use of the hammer may have been in self-defense. So this is not a good faith actor. He first reports that Antifa brandished hammers. Then when it becomes undeniable that it was the right-wingers who brandished the hammers, he says, oh, right, that's true. The opposite of what I reported is true, but it was plausibly in self-defense. So not a good faith actor, even though he's being lauded by the right. And then the cherry on top is that he now has been caught on video commiserating with a far-right group that was planning violence, and he never reported that they were planning this violence. The group is called Patriot Prayer. They were planning violence. Ngo is on video hanging out with them as they plan it. He reported nothing, and now it has been announced that he is no longer with Quillette, the publication for which he worked. Now, Quillette is saying that the separation is not directly related to the fact that he's been exposed as commiserating with right-wingers planning violence and said nothing about it. They say he actually left Quillette weeks ago and they're only announcing it now. Maybe that's true. Maybe it's not. I don't know the truth of that. So the big picture is, first of all, not surprisingly, someone that the right decided to hold up as both a martyr and a hero of sorts is not either of those things and really is a bad faith actor who was attacked. And I am against the violence, and he shouldn't have been punched and milkshaked. Okay, I want to be absolutely and totally clear. But when you put it all together, I just see a troubled guy, quite frankly. The combination of his completely dishonest and contradictory reporting, again, the starting to speak with this British accent a couple of years ago, which I know people will say, David, that doesn't really mean anything. I agree, it's a detail, but if you zoom out and look at the big picture here, taken with anything else, to me, it signals a troubled and confused person. And this is someone that we are better off seeing for what they are, which is really an unreliable and very partial right-wing. We can use the term journalist. We can use the term activist. We can use the term analyst or commentator. I don't know exactly what term to use, but now that we've sort of let it all play out over the last couple of months, I think the truth of Andy Ngo is surfacing. And I've even seen tweets and retweets from people who interviewed Andy Ngo and gave him the platform to talk about how bad everybody is to him and how bad the left is and all of this different stuff. They are even pointing out that things have certainly turned and taken a different direction with Andy Ngo. If you don't care about this guy or didn't know about him and quite frankly continue not to care, fair. I totally understand that. If you've been following this, I would be curious to hear from you. I'm on Twitter at @dpacman. Has your view changed about Andy Ngo from the beginning in June when this story and his being attacked came to prominence to now? Has your view changed or has it not? Was it always a negative view? Does it remain positive? I want to hear from you. I'm on Twitter at @dpacman. The show is on Twitter at David Pakman Show, and I hope you will join me this week. This week I will be doing once or twice in the evening live Twitch streams at twitch.tv/David Pakman. Make sure you're following me there, and I hope to see you at one of my streams.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Today's new members of the day are Jacob Frickmer and Brent Carlson. Thanks to both of you for supporting the work that I do directly via membership. I also want to say thanks to Kevin Meehan. Kevin Meehan, or Meehan, I think it's pronounced Meehan, has been a member for almost 5 years. Today's longtime sustaining member of the day. Joining is great. Remaining subscribed is even better. And you can sign up in under a minute at www.joinpakman.com. All right, we missed Hatriot Mail last week because of the David Pakman Show staff summer vacation, but it is back. Quick reminder, what is Hatriot Mail?
Teachers can buy their own school supplies, but we'll throw in the Glock for free. Hatriot Mail. Written by patriots who hate David Pakman because America. and because freedom.
This week's Hatriot Mail introduces a notable term. Let me put it that way. Let's take a listen to it.
Iggy Fing Bits, clickbait Pac-Man once again. Don't you ever learn? I'm generally unsubscribing. How about you hop off, buddy? Anybody can see what you're doing. Nothing personal, but you are a Jew. A pretty obvious Jew at that. Yes, you're white, David, because Ashkenazi Jews are actually Italians. You're a Spanish-speaking Italian who thinks he's a Jew. Must be tough, kid.
I'm an obvious Jew. That's interesting. So I guess the implication is that there would be subtle Jews and then there are obvious Jews. I'm in the latter category, apparently. The best way to fight patriotism in your local community is to become a member at joinpacman.com utilizing the coupon code Hatriot40, Hatriot 40. When you use the coupon code Hatriot40, you save 40% off of your membership. And Hatriots cry because they are extremely saddened by the fact that their patriotism is only furthering financial support of the David Pakman Show. That's how I see it anyway. I know that might not literally be how people see it, but go to joinpacman.com, pick your membership of choice, apply the coupon code Hatriot40, and get 100% of the member perks, but with a 40% discount. In reality, as I've told you earlier this week, Donald Trump has no leverage with China in this misguided, haphazard, never-ending, endlessly escalating trade war with China. Trump's tariffs are destroying farmers, among other workers in the United States. There's no serious plan to off-ramp from the tariffs. But Donald Trump has to pretend that he's winning because he's got nothing else. He at least needs to try to communicate confidence because the reality is far different. So Donald Trump made up, just concocted out of thin air, that China called him desperate to start trade talks so that they can stop all the losing that Donald Trump is causing them. Now, as I've told you before, the reality is that this trade war is far worse for the United States than it is for China. I won't rehash that entire conversation, but we discussed that earlier this week. But the real problem with Donald Trump claiming that China called him desperate to restart trade talks to end the trade war is that it didn't happen. Trump's tariffs and trade belligerence have been making the stock markets go crazy. It's bad economically. It's bad for all sorts of different participants in the American economy. So Trump says, hey, no worries. China's coming around. China called us and they said, please, let's start trade talks right away. The problem is it doesn't exist. I mean, it just didn't happen. Trump said during the last day of the G7 in France earlier this week that China, quote, called our top people Sunday night to, quote, get back to the table on ending the trade war. Trump's Treasury Secretary, Steven Mnuchin, repeated that they have been contacted by Chinese officials. And then the Chinese government multiple times said, yeah, it just didn't happen. There was no such call. The last call that China had with the United States was something like 2 weeks ago. Nothing that Trump says can simply be believed. Donald Trump is also now saying that Melania Trump has developed a relationship with Kim Jong-un, even though they've never met. I'll talk about that later in the show. But nothing that the guy says can be believed. And the problem with all of this is that it's very easy for Trumpist defenders to hear that Trump fabricated that this phone call took place. And their retort is, listen, all politicians lie. All politicians lie. And this is one of the really disturbing false equivalencies that we've seen under this sort of post-truth, alternative facts, fake news era under Donald Trump. All politicians lie. So the specific lies and provable lies that Donald Trump tells really aren't a big deal. The Trumpist defenders live in this fantasy world where they equate something like, I will work tirelessly to reduce the deficit. And then it doesn't work out. The deficit goes up. They equate that to China called me desperate to restart trade talks when there was no such phone call. I've said before, I don't excuse any lying, but there are politician lies and there are provable, brazen, factual lies. And these are two different things. Who do you believe on this one? It's crazy to say it. I believe the Chinese government. I don't believe that this phone call took place. I actually know people in my personal life who lie the way that Donald Trump lies. I try not to associate with them because they are just so toxic. But there are liars like Trump who have been kind of in and out of friend groups that I've been in. And the lies are so brazenly attention seeking or for self-aggrandizement. The thing that these liars hate the most is when people don't care. They don't even argue. They just ignore it altogether. I actually remember someone I knew who would lie about just stupid things. I mean, provably false things. There was this person who once said, hey, I got into Northeastern University Medical School in Boston, but I chose not to go. Now, I know Northeastern has no medical school. I mean, there's no Northeastern Medical School. It doesn't exist. But I don't care. I would just say, oh, all right, that's cool. And then I would continue the conversation with other people in the group. And it infuriates these Trumpian liars when you just don't care about their lies and you ignore them. There's someone else I remember who said it was just such a whopper, something like, my glasses cost $1,200 because they're made of some special material. I know they're lying. I know there is no such thing, but I don't care. Oh, yeah, $1,200 glasses? Cool, yeah. I wear contacts. That's it. Move on to the conversation. They hate it, and they increasingly need to be the center of attention the more their lies are ignored or not taken seriously. And maybe that needs to be the approach in dealing with Donald Trump. Maybe there needs to be some lesson. Maybe there's some lesson in how I've dealt with these pathological brazen liars in my personal life that could be applied to Donald Trump. I don't know what the answer is, but the lies are getting more easily provably false. Not that I had a record-setting turnout at my inauguration was not provably false, but maybe there needs to be a different approach in dealing with some of these lies. Make sure you're following The David Pakman Show on Instagram. Excuse me, as I punch my mic. People recommending I get a totally different mic setup to avoid punching it, but we're looking into that. Follow The David Pakman Show on Instagram at David Pakman Show. And while you're there, follow me on Instagram at david.pakman. Incredible reviews of the Portuguese dog named Pulga, who watches The David Pakman Show daily. I posted a video of this dog to my Instagram page yesterday at david.pakman. Follow me there. We will take a quick break and be back right after this.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
It's great to welcome back to the program today Jonathan Haidt, who is a social psychologist and professor at New York University's Stern School of Business. He's the author of multiple New York Times bestsellers, including The Righteous Mind. The newer book, co-authored with Greg Lukianoff, The Coddling of the American Mind, is just now available in paperback. Jonathan, so great to have you back on.
Thanks, Dave. It's great to be back.
So we've been talking a lot on the program about the sort of media cycles related to kind of modern politics now, in particular, as the election is starting to ramp up, and how sort of at a core structural level, the way in which corporate media cover politics perpetuates a lot of the polarization that you've been writing about for a long time. Do you see it that way today?
Oh, my goodness, yes. I think of human beings as this amazing species that came down out of the trees and evolved for life in small groups, groups of 50 to 150 people that are constantly, or not constantly, but often at war with each other, or at least having violent intergroup conflicts. And we evolved to circle around rocks and trees and other things, make them sacred, and then have small-scale religion. That's human nature. Now, somehow or other, we escaped from that. We built these gigantic societies that were feudal originally and very hierarchical. And then very recently, we built these amazing secular, relatively egalitarian, open, prosperous democracies. Really quite amazing what we've done. But we're still the same tribal, religious creatures that we've always been. And the modern media ecosystem, beginning with cable TV and then moving on to the internet and social media, has gotten more and more effective at breaking us up into smaller groups, feeding us with very different facts. We live in different worlds, worlds in which we hate the people in the other worlds, and we increasingly are willing to take action against them. So yes, it's very frightening.
One of the criticisms that's sometimes levied when one starts to make a more general, we live in different worlds and have different facts sort of analysis, which is not a wrong analysis, but one of the criticisms that sometimes comes up is, yes, people live in these self-perpetuating, algorithmic echo chamber sort of worlds with different facts, but there is still some truth. There are things that are true and things that are not true. And there needs to be more of a maybe reckoning, some would say, which separates the fact that there is a degree of polarization in which people are just in echo chambers. And at the same time, there is truth and falsity at the same time, is there not?
Oh, well, I certainly agree that there is truth or falsity, but I don't see that as a critique or criticism of the view that we now live in separate worlds. Rather, I would say the truth has always been hard to find, even about medical issues. People didn't notice that if doctors wash their hands, their patients don't die. And even when that was pointed out to them, they didn't believe it. So it's very hard to find the truth. We have universities, we have an academic system to ferret it out, and we also have journalists who are supposed to do that. So we have adaptations to help us find the truth. But man, has it gotten harder in the last 5 or 10 years because of social media. Almost anything that you take as a fact now, there are people on the other side. If it has a political valence, there are people on the other side who are certain and have evidence that you're wrong. Because I'm in the center and I write about these things, I get emails from people on all sides. So whatever the scandal, whether it's Brett Kavanaugh, whether it's the Amazon rainforest burning, people send me things to show, oh, look, the other side's crazy. So no, I do agree that there's truth. That's why I'm a researcher and a professor. But I am despairing of our ability as a country to find truth on important matters ever again.
So what is is there a set of a set of steps, so to speak, for someone who wants to determine that truth? Because as you say, there's a significant difference between supply side economics is a positive or negative influence on our economy, for example, and here is the reality of what we are doing to the planet because of industrialization and the burning of fossil fuels. I see those as distinctly different sorts of arguments. Question one is, do you agree that those are different types of arguments? And then the maybe more important part is, what is the process you can recommend to people to arrive at the truth about either or both of those issues?
Well, it's true that there are certain propositions that are more easily testable. And so on the question, is the planet warming? There are some people on the right who deny that, but as far as I can tell, there are very few. So that, I think, is widely accepted as a fact and has been for a long time, not by all. Next question, are human beings responsible for the warming? Well, then some more people on the right will drop off and say, they used to say, no, it's sunspots. I don't know if they still say that. So there are certain things that are facts, and I certainly think it's established that human activity is the major cause of the rise. But then the question is, anything else that happens? So let's just take the fires in the Amazon that people are understandably worried about. Well, if you're on the left, you're told that the Amazon is the lungs of the world, makes 20% of our oxygen. But I read from people on the right and in the center that biologists say that that's not true. Now, I haven't dug into it. I don't know. I'm just saying that anything
there is a counterpoint.
Well, it's not just that there is a counterpoint. It's that if you're a partisan, if you're on a team, whatever comes your way, you don't just say, is it true? You say, oh my God, this confirms the things that I believe most desperately. This confirms why they're so evil. And you have lots of people helping you confirm that. It's called confirmation bias, that we don't say, well, what's the evidence on both sides? We say, can I take this as evidence that my enemies are evil? We look for that evidence, and we always find it. And the internet, just Google it. You'll find it online. So yeah, there are facts, but I think I am just despairing of our ability to find them.
You have talked about the sort of evolutionary advantages that some of the dynamics that we observe in humans have had at prior times and maybe even still have today. One of the things I've been studying is this concept of the narcissism of small differences. And I'm curious, If we imagine a world where imagine that the right convinced the left to come to their side on global warming, on abortion, on gay marriage, whatever, right? Let's say the left said, you know what, you've convinced us, you're right. Would there not be a re-stratification within the new sort of pillars of discussion wherein there would be a new outgroup within the right that would be on the left of what is left, so to speak, and you would have the same exact degree of polarization, disagreement, and sort of alternate fact worlds that you describe?
Yes, in general, I think that's true. I mean, we certainly have made a lot of moral progress. Each side has convinced the other of a few things. The direction of history has been more in the progressive direction, in that should women have the right to vote? Should women have equal opportunity or equal access to everything? There's not any serious debate or doubt over that. So then we move on where the left says, well, okay, now what we need is equal representation, that women should be 50% of, say, all the engineers and computer programmers. And the right says, no, we should have equal opportunity. I wouldn't exactly call it the narcissism of small differences. Those are major and important philosophical questions. What counts as the standard for a fair society? But yes, I think your general point is that progress, be it material progress or moral progress, will never end our furious debates. We will always find things to argue about. Something as simple as, is the cause of our problems that we've lost touch with the old ways and the wisdom of our ancestors? Or is the problem that we are not advancing fast enough and we need to tear down what we've inherited and build something new? That's the fundamental question between progressives and conservatives.
Is the political system that we have well suited to adjudicate some of these bigger questions that you've mentioned today and also that you talk about in the book? Or is it fundamentally a system that either by design or by outcome, by side effect, is not going to possibly resolve those disagreements?
Yeah, well, I would never say not possibly, because the future is very long and we've been through bad times before. So, 50, 100 years from now, I have no idea where we'll be. My friend Steven Pinker is probably right that things will be a lot better. Certainly on material issues, they'll be a lot better. But are there specifically some design flaws or problems with our system that make us worse or more gridlocked, more dysfunctional than many other democracies? I think the answer is yes. So the worst number of political parties to have in a country is 1. That's really, really bad. But the second worst number is 2, because our minds are really finely tuned to do us versus them. And there's even research showing that if you break people up into 3 or 4 different groups, you don't get the kind of split, you don't get the ferocity of the split that you get when you break people up into 2 groups. So 2 is we have 2 parties. I wish we didn't. It wasn't the design of the founders, but it emerged even over the question of whether to ratify the Constitution. There were the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists. Our system is designed to make it easy to block bad ideas, to block whims and passions of the public. So our system is designed to be a vitocracy, and then various kinds of political corruption have amplified that. Any group that is strongly, like the NRA, any group that really wants to stop something, has a lot of ways they can stop it. Whereas if the majority favors something, it's very hard for them to actually push it into law.
What are the particular issues that you see as, at least in the short to medium term, not solvable as a result of that structure?
So I think almost all of our big issues are going to be very hard to solve. So let's just take climate change for one. So I think the left has been correct about the nature of the problem, but the right has been correct that trying to solve it by getting big government agreements is hopeless. We're not going to get China and India to solve things because they agree, to reduce their pollution because of some agreement that their government signed. Emmanuel Macron tried to do that, and he had riots. He tried to have more environmental-minded policies. He had riots in France. So countries aren't going to do that. That way, I think, lies failure. I think the right is correct, and here what I mean is especially the libertarian or free market right, that these problems are massive, and the only way we're going to decarbonize is if individual consumers and companies conclude that it's cheaper and better for them to use carbon-free sources. And so I think if we leave it to AOC and the Green New Deal, which basically tries to approach climate change by importing all the things that the left most wants, that approach, the Green New Deal, has some good things in it, but it guarantees that people on the right are going to fight it tooth and nail. I mean, we have to have a high minimum wage to fight carbon.
Yeah. So, okay, but let's go back just one half a step maybe. I actually sort of sympathize with the idea that I believe the facts bear out that in the long term, it is actually cheaper, more efficient, and therefore more profitable to get away from fossil fuels. But I think the missing step in the libertarian approach is, unless there is an intermediary force that pushes before we get to the long term, in the short term, it's much easier not to do it. And I think that that's where the libertarian analysis that you made falls a little bit short.
Oh, totally agree. So, if I were king, or if I could advise, or if there was a government capable of acting on advice, I would say that that ultimately the heavy lifting is going to be done by market forces. And if we could have massive federal expenditure into getting really cheap solar, wind, and nuclear really has to be part of the problem if we're serious about this. Massive government expenditure to get to those points 10 or 20 years earlier than we would without subsidies. Yes, it's urgent that we do it. So I'm not a partisan. I'm not a conservative, a progressive, or a libertarian. I think all three have insights. To go back to your earlier question, what should one do if they want to find the truth? I'll tell you what worked for me. I was on the left when I started writing The Righteous Mind. My goal was to help the Democrats win more elections. And I committed myself to understanding conservatives and libertarians. And what I discovered is that if you look at the best writing, you get lots of great ideas. There are lots of really smart, interesting people on all sides. Whereas if you get the worst writing, if you're on Twitter and you just experience people, the most extreme versions, you'll think, well, they're stupid and evil. So I think we do need as individuals and in a policy process, we do need people to propose ideas, other people to say, no, that won't work because of X, here's a better way. And you have to have a process by which the best ideas win. Universities are supposed to do that.
That's sort of the idea of the Hegelian dialectic in a sense. But the concern I have with it is that when some of the ideas being proposed are outrageous, you're sort of pulling the mean in a direction that is not particularly productive. I mean, that's my concern with the idea you're proposing.
I think I see what you're saying, so John Stuart Mill didn't use the phrase marketplace of ideas, but it's not a bad metaphor. And so if in a real marketplace, real marketplaces work really well. But if you had a marketplace in which you had a lot of people trying to manipulate the market, and you have lobby groups and industry groups putting out fake reports, yeah, that's a market failure. So that's why we need quality control. And that's why universities, I think, are or should be our best hope for finding the truth. Now, I've been very concerned that in the social sciences, which is what we're really talking about here, we really need the social sciences to work right to solve these political and social problems. In the social sciences, they've always leaned left, which is not a problem as long as there are a few people, real researchers who are committed to the academy, to say, well, wait a second, here's some counter evidence. We used to have that. Now that we've shifted much further to one side, and this is happening across society. In a polarization cycle, lots of institutions are purifying. So my fear is that social science research is not as reliable as it would be if we had more viewpoint diversity. When you have serious professors who are committed to the research process, you don't get crazy ideas put in. That comes from lobby groups and non-professionals.
So you're not literally saying every crazy idea should be part of what is considered the serious discussion, but that we should have a system in place that will sort of filter so that the ideas that are being taken seriously have passed some kind of either explicit or implicit vetting of sorts.
Yes, that's right. I would never say we need all ideas. I would never even say we need all perspectives. What I would say is we have to really look out for orthodoxy. If we have any group that is responsible for finding the truth, which is subject to orthodoxy, which means that if someone finds counter-truth, they will be shamed or expelled, then we cannot rely on the conclusions of this group.
We've been speaking with Jonathan Haidt. He is a social psychologist. The paperback version of The Coddling of the American Mind, co-authored with Greg Lukianoff, is now available. Jonathan, so great to speak to you as always.
My pleasure, David.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
We covered the bulk of the policy fiascos and the diplomatic errors of the Trump administration at the G7 meeting in France over the last couple of shows. And today I have sort of like a sideline story from the G7 that's just genuinely bizarre. Donald Trump said at the G7 earlier this week that his wife, Melania Trump, has, quote, gotten to know North Korean dictator Kim Jong-un. And Melania, having gotten to know Kim Jong-un, believes that Kim Jong-un really has the potential, I guess, to turn around North Korea. Now, even if all of this were true, I don't know why we would care about Melania Trump's opinion about the DPRK. I don't know the answer to that. I don't think we would care. But the more important thing is that Melania has never met Kim Jong-un. Take a look at this video of Donald Trump.
Kim Jong-un, who I've gotten to know extremely well, First Lady has gotten to know Kim Jong-un, and I think she'd agree with me. He is a man with a country that has tremendous potential. You're in between China, Russia, and South Korea.
Now, the White House spokeswoman later said Melania has actually never met Kim Jong-un. The questions immediately swirling. Question one, is it possible that it's Ivanka Trump that met Kim Jong-un and Trump is confused between Melania and Ivanka? He's made similar comments about both of their bodies over the last 10 or 15 years. Maybe the confusion goes beyond just seeing them as being similarly well endowed or something like that. What was the official explanation? Because there is an obvious impossibility here. Trump says Melania has gotten to know Kim Jong-un. The White House says Melania has never met Kim Jong-un. How could both be true? You're going to like this. Stephanie Grisham, the White House spokeswoman, said, President Trump confides in his wife on many issues, including the detailed elements of his strong relationship with Chairman Kim. And while the First Lady hasn't met him, the president feels like she's gotten to know him too. Why does he have to lie about the dumbest things? The answer is that it simply comes naturally to him. It's reflexive. It's possibly even pathological for him. And of course, this raises the question of, has Trump shared confidential, classified, or otherwise sensitive and secret information with Melania Trump? That would, of course, be a concern as well. And to be perfectly frank, I'm more interested in whether Melania Trump has gotten to know Justin Trudeau, looking very, very friendly, greeting each other at the G7 while Donald Trump stood aside. Anyway, there is one other possibility. Maybe Melania Trump and Kim Jong-un have met and it's being covered up, although it doesn't seem like the most likely thing. I don't recall Melania Trump even attending the trips during which Donald Trump met Kim Jong-un. All very weird. The most likely explanation is the simplest one, the one that requires the fewest assumptions, which is Donald Trump just made it up because he makes things up on the spur of the moment all the time, and then later somebody's got to clean it up for him. But in the words of the Trumpist defenders, he's a politician. All politicians lie, but at least he's doing the right thing. Remember the takeaway, which I mentioned earlier. You can't believe anything Donald Trump or his administration say without further researching it first. The most basic pedestrian assertions by Donald Trump need to be interpreted as potentially lies until you've actually gotten independent confirmation. That's the real takeaway from the G7 for me. I actually have some good news for you today. Farmers are furious with Donald Trump. Now, the reason that they're furious is not good, which is they're getting crushed, absolutely destroyed by Donald Trump's tariffs and Trump's pointless, fruitless, endless trade war. But the fact that the farmers are now correctly blaming Trump for what Trump did is a good thing. Trump's lies often work, and frequently they go unpunished. We have in front of us step one in Donald Trump actually suffering the consequences, or suffering some consequences from his lies, which is that farmers are identifying them as lies. This is step one. Step one is acceptance. Donald Trump's tariffs have led to massive drops in a number of agricultural exports: soybeans, pork, wheat, a number of other farm exports. Now, the administration has tried to sort of make up for this by subsidizing farmers, which sounds a lot like the socialism that Donald Trump claims to be against. But okay, anyway, it's not been enough. Farm bankruptcies are climbing. Farmers are buying less and less farm equipment. So the manufacturers of the farm equipment are starting to suffer. The problems are trickling up, so to speak. And Donald Trump's subsidies just aren't cutting it. Donald Trump has now straight up started lying and saying farmers are doing great again. It's not true, but much like the China phone call that never happened, Trump realizing that things aren't going well with the trade war and saying, don't worry, China's desperate to figure this out. They've called me to start trade talks. Of course, they haven't. There was no such phone call. Donald Trump is simply saying, things are going great for farmers now. And fortunately, the farmers are actually pushing back. And the farm groups are saying, no, things are not going well. Quote from Brian Thalman, who is the president of the Minnesota Corn Growers Association. There are dozens and dozens of these groups. Brian Thalman saying, we're not starting to do great again. Things are going downhill and downhill quickly. Will they vote as a result of that? We don't know, but at least they've correctly identified that Donald Trump is lying. The National Farmers Union says Donald Trump's tariffs are making things, quote, worse, not better. Will they vote on the basis of that understanding? We don't know. More and more individual farmers like Bob Coylan are saying, I'm doing terribly since Donald Trump came into office, and it's getting worse and worse. So that's all good. This is just what we call step one. Then it gets to where the rubber meets the road. Will these farmers vote for a Democrat in 2020? Will they stay home? We heard from this same farmer, Bob Coylan, to CNN, quote, if he doesn't lose, he being Trump, if Trump doesn't lose 100% of it from the farm belt, then people are kind of crazy because this is not going well for farmers at all. Are farmers going to vote for someone else? Are lifelong Republican farmers in the Midwest going to vote for a Democrat in 2020? I hope the answer is yes, but I don't know. And this is something I've been talking about for a long time. Just because a lifelong Republican is displeased with what Donald Trump is doing or with some aspect of what Donald Trump is doing doesn't mean they're going to vote for a Democrat. Now, that's okay, and I'll explain that in a moment. We actually had a phone call, a couple phone calls from Trumpists who say, I don't like that Trump hasn't built the wall. And I asked them, it was Doug from Jamul, in fact, I remember. I said to Doug, okay, if Trump doesn't build the wall by 2020, are you not voting for him? And he said, well, no, I mean, okay, I probably still would. And more than likely, the reason he won't build the wall if he doesn't is because of Democrats standing in the way or whatever. So it's really important to understand that any dissatisfaction you hear from these lifelong, reliable Republican voters with Donald Trump, it doesn't mean they're going to vote for someone else. But here's the upside. Even if they just stay home on election day, it's not a bad thing, assuming that the left can get our base out to vote in November of 2020. Because let's be very, very honest about this. If they haven't decided not to vote for Trump in 2020 by now, they're either voting for Trump or maybe staying home. With most of them, the best we can hope for is that they stay home. And that's okay because they're not going to vote for a Democrat. But the reason why this is all okay, and we shouldn't worry too much about these farmers not voting for a Democrat, is that national elections are not won by convincing people on the other side to vote for your person in large numbers, right? There cannot really be an election where 130 million people vote, or whatever the number is, flipped by arguing with people and changing their minds when half the country doesn't vote. It's about getting out the vote, and then we'll accept anything that depresses vote on the right or splits the opposition vote. So I talked earlier this week, Trump has a primary challenger, former Republican Congressman Joe Walsh is running in the primary. Maybe he will eventually run as an independent. Will some angry farmers in the Midwest maybe opt to vote for Joe Walsh or stay home as a result of that? That would be fine. We would gladly accept that. Maybe a few percent of the national Republican electorate that isn't pleased with Trump will choose to stay home. They're not going to vote for a Democrat, but they won't vote at all. That still helps us. As long as we get our base out, this is the path to a win. And these farmers, even if they don't vote, can be a part of turning what was in 2016 an election that ultimately was decided by 75,000 or so votes in 3 states. Just a few farmers staying home in combination with us getting our base out can actually make a difference. Maybe some of them will actually go and vote for the Democratic nominee. I don't know, but we don't need them to do that is the point. We have a voicemail number. That number is 219-2-DAVID-P. Here's an interesting question, which relates to a lot of different things we talk about on the show. Take a listen.
Hi, my name is James. I'm calling from Cincinnati, Ohio. You do a great job. Thank you for everything you do. You are very articulate and you form your sentences really well on the fly, or you're quick on your feet, so to speak. And that's a skill that I'm just really struggling at. I'm wondering if that's a skill that you've always had since you were a little kid, or if it's something you really had to develop. I would like to be more articulate when I speak on my feet like you do, and sound basically more intelligent. I just wondered if you have any advice, or if you've also had any struggles in the past and you've had to work on it, or if it's just something that came natural to you. That's all. Thank you. Again, thanks for everything you do. Bye.
Here's the thing. Thinking on your feet and being articulate. Anthony Fantano actually has a really good video about this on one of his channels about how to be articulate. There's 2 parts to it. There is subject matter knowledge, which does matter, okay? And beyond that, it's just social comfort and comfort in situations where one needs to think on their feet. And I have no question whatsoever why I developed the comfort. And it's the jobs I held from the time that I was young. When I was 14, I started working at a laser tag place. I actually got a work permit from the school superintendent, who said, David's doing okay enough in school that I'm going to allow him to have a job instead of having to wait until he's 16. And I worked at a laser tag place. And I was the person who had to deal with angry parents because their kids' equipment, their laser tag gun wasn't working, and handle payments and all of this stuff at age 14. I had to be able to think on my feet and deal with parents and kids and people of all ages and college kids coming in drunk to play laser tag and whatever else. I then worked at Circuit City as a salesperson, the now defunct electronics retail chain. And I was constantly dealing with angry people because their TV's not working right, or their laptop's not working right, or trying to sell extended service plans to people and having to, in the moment, sort of gauge what sort of sales technique would best work. It was just that. And that is how it's just a matter of practice and developing confidence and social comfort. Sort of the opposite of like a social anxiety is what I think most helps there. And also having some subject matter knowledge. I think that there is listen, maybe I recently read Catch Me If You Can by Frank Abagnale, or Abagnale, I'm not sure how he pronounces his last name. He may have been a skilled enough con man where in a complete void of subject matter knowledge, he could appear to be knowledgeable about something. For most people, I think you actually need to have the subject matter knowledge in the area in which you are trying to be articulate and well-spoken. We've got a great bonus show for you today. A college board is dropping its adversity score for students after major backlash. We will talk about Kentucky Fried Chicken, or I guess now it's just called KFC, trying plant-based chicken nuggets and wings in the United States. And we will also talk about YouTube's CEO saying that it is more important than ever to let people upload whatever they want to upload to YouTube. That's interesting, and there is a double meaning there that I am going to talk about on today's bonus show. Become a member at joinpacman.com or a patron at patreon.com/David Pakman Show to get instant access to today's bonus show. I'll speak to you then.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.